This is a world cut off from everything. A world of mountains and prayer. A world also where men suffer and struggle year-round against harsh nature, against the cold, the wind, and the ice. In the Himalayas, at an altitude of 3,600 meters, winter starts early and lasts 9 months. At night, the temperature drops to minus 35 degrees Celsius. These are the Zanskar Mountains. Slowly, day after day, the ice is closing over the swift-running waters of the Zanskar River, transforming it into the Chadar, the frozen river. Life is imprisoned in this one-way mirror. The ice has frozen everything up to the farthest tributaries of the Zanskar for 4 or 5 months. This frozen river then becomes the only passage linking this small, forgotten kingdom to the rest of the world. Ladakh is a region of India. It's a land of high plateaus and mountains, which rise to an altitude of 7,000 meters. A smaller, lesser-known realm lies to the south of Ladakh, the Zanskar. All the roads to Zanskar are closed in the winter. They are snowbound and impassable. There's only one way out, via a dangerous, ephemeral, fearsome and fragile route. It's a partially frozen river known as the Zanskar in summer. Once it freezes in winter, everyone calls it the Chadar, a 120-kilometer frozen corridor stretching along the base of the narrow gorges. As the only passage between Zanskar and Ladakh, it is vital. Men fear it, but are sometimes forced to take it.
I've traveled on the Chadar 4 times. 2 round trips. The first time I was young. It was to go to school in Leh. The second time was for my work with the government. On the Chadar, I would take 2 pairs of goatskin shoes with a special smooth sole. With 2 pairs, I could change them if they got wet or torn. There can be a lot of snow on the Nairak Do, part of the gorge, and the risk of avalanches is high. "40 years ago, it snowed much more than now. When it snows, it's not so cold. The snow then melts, which means there's more water in the river. All sorts of obstacles delay the caravans. That's why it used to take 8 or 9 days. These days, there's less snow, so less risk. Making good progress, you can reach Leh in 4 or 5 days. You need less food, so you carry less and can travel faster. It's important to have a guide who's familiar with the springs. They know where the ice is thinnest. The Chadar is a very old route. The Zanskar caravans preferred this route, as it was shorter. They could trade with Ladakh, selling yak butter and buying spices, clothes, rice, lentils and salt.
All the passes are now blocked by snow. The summer path is closed. There is no more contact with the outside world. No truck has arrived or left Zanskar in over 2 months. The large Zanskar plain is waking up. It is minus 15 degrees Celsius, which is fairly warm for this time of year. Since the 1980s, the road, trekking, and humanitarian sponsorship have improved the living conditions of the 8,000 Zanskari. The country is opening up, but slowly. Here, people share their world with benevolent gods and demons, and the Zanskari must make sure that any changes don't annoy them. Stanzin, 25 years old, works as a guide in the summer, and in the winter sometimes works as a porter on the Chadar. His wife is expecting their 4th child. This is a big family for the Zanskari. When Stanzin was 18, his father decided he should marry, so he left his village to live in this house. It's always the same here. Neither girls nor boys choose their partners. Everyone obeys their family, their father. He knows best what is good for you. Families and animals live in the same house. In the winter, they huddle together on the ground floor. By late afternoon, the animals make their own way in. A maze of dark stables leads to the kitchen, the only room where the temperature rises above 0 in the winter. The heat comes from the animals and the dry dung burning in the stove. Satin is a farmer. He takes the Chadar to sell his butter in Ladakh. He lives with his 2 wives, who are sisters. Polygamy is unusual here. It's more common for one woman to marry 2 brothers. Polyandry is tolerated in Zanskar so that land is not split up. Most often, the Zanskari live in couples. No one can survive here alone. 1 month ago, during the New Year's celebrations, Satin killed a yak with his neighbors. They then went to pray at the monastery. A few tiny pieces of this meat showed up in the tukpa, the flour soups, and the rice dishes. Fresh vegetables and fruits are impossible to find in winter. Winters are long. There's plenty of time to spend together, and it's far too cold to be outside. The family and the village community are supported by mutual assistance and solidarity. And yet, life is happy here.
The Chadar is dangerous. If the ice cracks, you fall in the water, and you need help. If you're sick, you also need help. That's why I never go on my own.
As for Tashi, he left his village to get married in Padum, where he is a carpenter. During the winter, he works as a porter on the Chadar.
I always check with my father-in-law before venturing on the river. He tells me how the Chadar will be, whether the ice will be okay or not. If he says the conditions are all right, I'll go. My father-in-law meditates a lot. In the winter he spends 3 or 4 months alone in a cave, without seeing a soul.
In 1988, Tashi's father-in-law withdrew to the mountains. For 4 years, he meditated in one room without seeing the light of the sun or the moon. This is why people consult him before taking the trip on the Chadar.
The first time I went on the Chadar was in 1965 for a business trip to Leh in Ladakh. In fact, it was to pick up the pay for the team working at Padam, who were still waiting to be paid. When I left Padam, the Chadar was fine, and it was an easy trip to Leh. But when we came back in March, it took 21 days to get home. We often had to climb on the rocks or get in the water. After camping at Tilet Sumdu, we had to leave the river altogether and climb up to the passes via the Jumlam. We didn't have enough food. We had to turn back and return to Chiling to buy tsampa before setting out again. It's a very long trail. We were heavily loaded, and 5 days later we started running out of tsampa. We had almost no food left. By a stroke of luck, we found some ibex. Fortunately, our caravan included some Muslims, who were able to kill 2 of them. We ate the meat, and that saved our lives. The second time I traveled along the Chadar was in 1968, for another trip to Leh. The ice was really bad, and we could not get through. We had to wait 10 days at the Lingshed monastery. As the Chadar was still impassable, we had to take to the mountains. The Sinjla Pass, Wanla and Lamayuru, to reach Leh.
After consulting his father-in-law, Tashi met his friends at Stanzin's house. Everyone is getting ready for a harsh ordeal. They are going to hire themselves out to haul timber over the Chadar. This means leaving their families for at least 2 weeks, time it takes to transport the wood and return, if the demons allow it. All the men fear the Chadar, but it's also a way for them to earn some money in this extremely poor region. The lamas prayed for the gods to accompany all the men, young and old, in their expedition over the Chadar. There are men from Nera, Dibling, Skyumpata. Some 150 porters from the 6 villages in the district are arriving in Anumil, a 2-day walk away. But some come from even farther away, even Lingshed, 50 kilometers away, for this tough job. There aren't enough shelters to house all the porters, even when they huddle in together. It's snowing. The late arrivals spend the night outside. They are also the first awake. The timber is transported by truck to the slope of Anumil, where the porters draw lots for their loads. These 150 porters are all simple farmers. They can't pass up a chance to earn a few extra rupees. Even Punsok, who's always anxious, is there. He always consults the astrologer before setting foot on the ice. He fears the dangers of the frozen river, but no one can afford to refuse this work. With the €3 he'll earn carrying a piece of wood, he will buy sugar and a sack of rice. The wages are based on the number of pieces of wood carried, not on the weight. Certain beams are twice the size of others, but no one argues about drawing lots. Some of the wood is taken down to the riverbank in the afternoon. Now, the wood has to be hauled as far as Lingshed, 50 kilometers away. At best, it will take 4 days to reach the town. 2 days on the river, arriving directly below the village, then another 2 days as the men carry the timber on their backs the 600 meters straight up to the village. The youngest porter is only 13. He is very proud to be able to earn a few rupees carrying the timber. He made a deal with his uncle, who will take half of his burden in addition to his own. The porterage on the Chadar will start tomorrow at dawn. The Zanskari are highly superstitious. They fear these nights in the caves, which they believe are filled with demons. In the morning, the youngest are exhausted by the battles in their dreams, like the monks' dances.
Hey.
Some men left early in the morning before everyone else. They had already spent 2 nights outside, and tonight they'd like to find a spot in a cave. The long caravan of wood porters set out a half hour later. But over 2 days, the conditions on the Chadar have changed. Those who went ahead to scout the route had to wait for the others to build a makeshift bridge. It's always the same when it snows. The temperature rises, as does the water level. The ice expands, cracks, and then the problems start.
It's hard work pulling the timber over the ice. But being poor, we need work in winter to earn a little cash. That is why we do the portering. We get 150 rupees for each piece of timber. Usually one porter can carry 4 pieces, so we can earn 600 rupees, or $15 per trip. Each trip lasts 4 days. Obviously the timber costs a lot less than the transport, which is 3 or 4 times higher than the price of the wood.
Even when the ice is thick, it's exhausting to carry the heavy, unwieldy loads of wood all day long. But the men's greatest worry is thin ice, which gives way under their feet or suddenly starts to melt. When the ice loosens up, there's no place to walk, and often no rocks on the banks which porters can climb to continue their route. Suddenly, the caravan has encountered an obstacle. There's no ice for over 50 meters on each side of the river. It's because of a well-known hot water spring. Will they have to turn around now that they've already walked for so many hours already? There is a possible passage on the right bank, on the other side by the rock face, but with the 150 loads of wood, there's no hope of climbing. The beams will have to go via the left bank. It's an exhausting, painstaking job, but 50 pieces of timber have passed through. Now it's time for the men who cannot take the same route. Without ropes or harnesses and in makeshift boots, they're forced to climb up the cliffs, sometimes risking their lives. Some have taken the high road, while others decide to continue on the river 50 meters below, convinced they can't stand the heights. But is the icy water any less fearsome? The first porters made it past the obstacle nearly 2 hours ago. The sun has gone behind the rocks, and the temperature dropped 10 degrees. These men have lived their entire lives in icy weather 8 months of the year, but they don't all react the same way when forced into water that's 2 degrees below zero. Only the most courageous, those who wade through the freezing water barefoot, will reach the shelter dry. The others will have to finish the Chadar in wet clothes. Before the socks can stiffen in the freezing temperatures, they are pulled on wet. The boots, bought second-hand from the Indian Army at the Leh market, often have holes. They rarely need to be emptied out. Nightfall is just 1 hour away when the last porters complete the passage. The first ones have already reached the caves a few kilometers away. They draw lots to decide who has to gather wood for the fire, despite the hard day. It's the second day of porterage on the Chadar. While a few still linger in the more comfortable caves, most of the porters left without breakfast to warm themselves up by walking. The river has not frozen evenly, but for the moment, there is still a strip of ice that can bear the weight of a man and his burden. If the wood falls in the water, there is little chance of being able to recover it. The current can drag it quickly under the ice. For the porters, there is the constant danger of falling in the water. Even if they survive the shock of the icy water, most of them don't know how to swim. Three weeks ago, after a long cold spell, the level of the Chadar dropped and the ice collapsed. The blocks of ice formed dams. The water overflowed, refroze, and left behind a jumble of ice. Despite the difficulties, the fear, and the wood that seems to get heavier with every step, there's a sense of relief among the men. They're reaching their goal. But when they reach the narrow valley leading to Lingshed, they are suddenly overcome with fatigue. They're done with the unpredictable river, but physically, the hardest part still lies ahead. They have to carry the timber 600 meters straight up. The wood is heavier than ever, and they can no longer slide the beams. After the ice steps comes a long, slightly sloping valley with glacial cross cliffs. Night is fast approaching, and the men don't want to camp outside for the fourth night. They leave their beams and climb up to the village. Everyone from Lingshed does the same. The final step of the trip starts tomorrow. For 10 days, the men go back and forth between the village and the river to bring up the timber slated for the school construction. Lingshed is perched at an altitude of 4,000 meters above the frozen river between Ladakh and Zanskar. 45 farmers and their families live below the monastery built 500 years ago. 20 years ago, the residents of Lingshed were truly cut off from the rest of the world, because it took several days over paths and the river to reach the village. Many people died because there were no doctors. Even today, women give birth in hazardous conditions. Yet things have been slowly changing in recent years on the initiative of the Geshe, the monastery's abbot, and help from foreign sponsors. Just a few years ago, parents did not send their children to school because they were needed to work in the fields.
Conditions of years.
30 years ago, classes were taught outside in a field. It was a government school. But the conditions were tough, what with the cold and heavy snowfalls. The teacher never stayed here for long. They would arrive in spring, which comes late, around May or June, and stay for 2 or 3 months before returning to Leh or their own village. Then, when the winter started with all the snow, they never wanted to come back.
The teacher came from another Zanskari village. He and his wife teach 3 languages: Tibetan, Urdu, and English, along with mathematics, science, and civics. Thanks to an Austrian sponsor, the primary school is open even during the long winter months. The 6 villages in the district are counting on their children's education to provide for their futures. But the Lingshed Solar School, constructed in the year 2000, needs to be expanded. The major problem is transporting materials to the village.
One room is very difficult because
Building a classroom is really difficult because it's so complicated transporting the wood.
sometimes the coming water.
Sometimes if there's a lot of water, you have to go that deep into the river.
The ice on that time there's
Sometimes when the ice is broken, you spend 3 or 4 days freezing.
very coldness.
It can get really cold, which is tough.
Coldness and it's very difficult.
पंकज शंख पद्मनिधिभिर्युक्ता प्रसन्न
Barely 15 days after the exhausting timber portage, the men of Lingshed return along the frozen Chadar. But this time, they are taking children to the large school in Leh.
भाग्यदाम्
Their caravan sets out on February 22nd to travel the 90 kilometers over the mountains and ice that separates them from the Ladakh Valley. After walking through the snow and crossing a pass, they spend the night in the high mountain shelters of Nerek along the river. Each child is accompanied by his father or an uncle. Two of them are but 5 years old. The caravan is in a hurry because the ice will soon melt, and those not able to return by the river will be stuck in Leh when the ice breaks up. Yet they waited for the temperature to rise a few degrees before leaving with the children. It's a tough trip for them. Some nights, the temperatures drop to around minus 30 degrees Celsius. The bags are heavy. The children are leaving for several months, and they packed extra food in case they are blocked several days on the Chadar, waiting for the ice to freeze again. This venture is even more dangerous with children. They get tired more quickly, and they cannot walk through the water as the men sometimes have to do. Young Stanzin, 5 years old, leads the way, and the caravan settles into his rhythm. They take a first break after 3 hours, enjoying a bit of sun while they have something to eat and drink. This is the best time of the day.
Winter time and Holi.
In winter, they're the holidays. The students who came home to Lingshed must return to Leh now that the holidays are over. This little boy is very poor. His father died a month ago. A tourist who once visited Lingshed will be paying his fees. He's going to live in Leh.
There's a trail is sponsored, Singila, and then also now all the many snow.
There's a lot of snow at Singla. All the paths are blocked.
This is Chadar winter time, or just one.
Chadar is the only route in the winter. The others are all impassable. Some days are hard, others are easier.
Maybe Chadar of water then difficult.
If the water in the Chadar is high, it's difficult. I hope the ice is hard now. Maybe it's been hot. I don't know. Maybe. I hope it is hard.
Shakya's smile conceals his concern. He is the leader of the expedition and responsible for everyone's safety. The water level has risen 30 centimeters and soaked into the snow. Because of the currents and sometimes the sun, the ice changes all the time. Within just a few meters, it can shatter like glass. The Chadar can be deadly. Shakya goes down to test the ice, which has become too thin. They can't take any risks with the children. The caravan has to travel over the rocks to go around this bad passage. They organize the climb, though they're fearful, despite the children's good humor and determination. Later, they will have to walk in the water, but the children are not equipped. Even the men don't always have good shoes. Bravely and even enthusiastically, the line gets moving again over the Chadar ice. After losing many hours, they are finally sliding across strong, firm ice. It's gradually becoming colder. The water, which had flowed over the first layer of ice, froze on the surface. Shakya can't make up his mind. The fragile crust makes the ice hard to probe. He decides that it's safer to climb up the hill above the river. Young Stansin, who never stops in the village and runs after the goats for hours, is exhausted and subdued. His uncle has put him on a sled. Dusk is settling in, and they push hard to reach a gorge where there are shelters and enough wood for the entire caravan. The children gather wood and the stones that will protect the fire. The cook pulls some sugar from his goncha. The sweetened tsampa is an exceptional treat. Stansin relishes it down to the last crumb. The sun skims over the top of the rocks, but it's bitterly cold in the gorges below. The men and women finally warm up by walking silently, their stomachs empty. Suddenly, the caravan is stopped dead. There is not enough ice to pass. They have to try to climb up the sides, but the rock seems fragile. It's very risky. The passage is tricky for several meters, and they have to climb without ropes. Anyway, they didn't bring any. Scarves will have to do. They would lose too much time if they roped the group up for each difficult passage. They don't have any water bottles, and everyone is dehydrated by the physical effort and the dry air. But no one drinks the icy river water. They all wait for a break to make tea. In June, Shakya and the others will return to bring back the school children, walking 4 or 5 days through the mountains. They need the children to help in the fields. Each family has only 4 months to store up enough food before winter returns. The people of Lingshed are poor, and without the help of sponsors, the children would not be able to study in Leh. The men spend several weeks every year on the road to the school. The world is changing, and they know that those who study will be better equipped to adapt as their traditions are overturned. The children have never seen a juniper so easy to reach. They will burn it tomorrow morning for the gods, to protect the caravan on the river. Everyone knows this trip is extremely dangerous, that there's a chance they won't make it through. It all depends on the demons. The caravan plans to stop at the caves of Tilit Do. It's still far, and despite their fatigue, they have to remain careful, not get distracted, and listen carefully to the sound of their steps on the ice. The sunlight has left the gorge. The temperature drops and the wind has picked up. They have to climb along the rocks 2 more times. Yet none of the children ever complains about the cold or the length of this interminable trip. Life is hard here. They become used to struggling at an early age. One more narrow pass and then another. It's not much further, says Shakya. Everyone wants to believe him. They hurry along. They finally reach the caves. Everyone agrees to share the shelters and give the best ones to the children. It's the last night on the river. After conquering the Chadar, the youngest are about to discover the large town of Leh. Later, once they are students, far from their villages, will they become strangers to their own world? Or, rich with knowledge, will they return to help their people adapt to the changes already underway? After walking for 4 days, the frozen corridor opens up gradually and lets in some sunlight. It's not as cold. The mountains are no longer covered with snow. Ladakh, finally. The Chadar ends here, where the river flows into the Indus. The Chadar is the only link to the outside world in the winter, but the Zanskari are awaiting the construction of the Chadar Road, an ambitious project that will follow the gorges of the frozen river and will remain open all year round.
The Chadar Road will make a big difference to Zanskar, because traveling on the river is tricky. Once the road is built, Zanskar will be able to develop. The only drawback is we won't be able to work as porters on the Chadar any longer. When the Zanskari are ill, they have to travel along the Chadar to get treatment in Leh. If they're too ill, they can no longer walk down the Chadar. It will be a good thing for the Zanskari. The journey will be easier. The Zanskari are very poor. When the Chadar road is built, We hope it will alleviate poverty. Now the summer trail connects us to a Muslim district. We feel much closer to the people in Leh than those in Kargil, because we share the same background in religion, Buddhism.
Leh is a relatively calm little town in winter. But after you've crossed the frozen river, the cars, restaurants, and stores seem like another world. A world where you can buy clothes and food. And the Zanskaris, who are used to bartering, find plenty of ways to spend the little money they worked so hard to earn on the Chadar. After school started, the return trip to Zanskar was hard for the parents. Some barely made it through before the ice broke up and returned to Lingshed over the Chadar. Others, who left several days later, had to turn around. The jumble of ice in the Chadar was replaced by the turbulent white water of the Zanskar. The ice trail has disappeared until next year.